What is going on, guys? This is Elias and this is Chess Theory. So I'm going over a great game today. This is what I'm going to consider the game of the day. There's a lot of things that came out in this specific game that I thought were really helpful, but I'm actually going to go into a different format. So one, I'm going to break this game down to you guys and then also post this same game in the normal or standard format. There's some things that I wanted to go over with you guys that I can guarantee if you take these things in hand and apply them to your own game, you are going to see a monumental shift in your personal playstyle and game. These things are definitely core tenets that are going to see you balance that win to loss ratio greatly, slanting it in the favor of winning. Your win ratio is going to get a lot better, I guarantee you. It may not be immediate, but the more you look at these specific key points that I've targeted in game, you are going to become a beast on the board. So there's going to be some jumping around, I know, and I don't want to ramble too much. So what you guys are looking at is the end game. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the game. The two things I want to cover right off the bat that I don't need to spend too much time on is basically natural development, right? You open, you have your opening, you've practiced it many times before, I'd hope. You understand the mechanics of how that works, what the pieces do, and the basics, right? If you grasp those concepts, the next thing that's going to help you get way better is basically in-game practice, the understanding of theory, the what can happen on the board, and it kind of goes hand in hand with being able to read your opponent, being able to know how to direct aggro, deflect, the whole nine, right? And if you're not familiar with these concepts, you're going to kind of become more confident in your playing once you kind of understand what they are. I can't go into everything in this small video or this small amount of time because this is a limited timetable that I'm working on, but that's why I've pinpointed these key structures in game. So with those two things being touched on, the experience, theory, in-game practice, and natural development of the game, you can kind of piece everything together. And what I'm trying to do here is connect the dots for you. So without staying on that idea for too much longer, I'm going to go ahead and actually jump into the game. So now that we've already kind of covered your opening, in this specific instance, it's going to be the ready opening for myself. This is a favorite of mine, and I realized the power and potential of this idea, this opening, and I've done this many times. So that's where the experience kind of comes into play, and the natural idea of theory and how the game is going to evolve with certain moves and how things kind of flow, the ebb and flow of the game, right? So as this continues onward, I'm going to get kind of in a bad position here. I'm not going to stay too much on the nitty-gritty of actually what happened in the game, but I'm trying to get to a specific point, and a lot of that is going to happen in the 33rd. So I'm going to continue on and rush. What you've just kind of seen me do is lay the foundation for not just a covered pawn advance, but you'll see me a better example of that working in game just momentarily here. So once I get to the 30th move, this is when I really wanted you guys to focus on the managing the microtransactions between pawns. So pawn positions are pivotal in the game, especially when it comes to mid to end game. So once you cross that threshold of mid to end game, you are going to be really focusing on pawns because that's when they become so important. The potential of you being able to march them across, get your queen, the whole nine, right? So this is why it's so pivotal for you to pay very close attention to what your pawns are doing, what's going to happen and take place, because I feel like a lot of people, and myself included, really brushed those off at the beginning of the game, not even caring what I lost. And there's an extent to where that's valid, but at the same time it's not overall. But if you start taking charge of those small, minute transactions that don't seem that important, you're going to start to see an avalanche of the accumulation effect taking place. So this is basically the foundation of my pawn advance, my covered pawn push. So once this happens, you're going to see me extend, pass, and now I'm laying the foundation for a potential move forward. His reaction to that is monumental because you realize how big of a threat that is. If I can get any of those pawns through to the other side, that's almost a death knell, right? This individual in this kind of scenario wants to attack my pawn on the back rank here. Once that happens, I don't want that to happen. So what I'm going to do is basically move to cover that. If he takes that material, he's opening himself up to an attack on the rook, which is going to put me in a far better position overall. So this is basically a discovered attack. So if he does that, I'm going to attack him and I'm going to come out on top in that kind of situation. So the two things I've covered so far, just to reiterate, managing microtransaction with pawns, this is currently what I'm doing. The second thing is basically discovered attack. One of the situations that happened in the interim in that moment was basically, not in that moment specifically, but what happened a little bit earlier is I moved my dark squared bishop basically to plug up this hole on the E file, right? My opponent can no longer move through there without losing one of his rooks, right, if he decides to attack with a rook. So this is what I call planting, because I'm in an advanced position that I can eventually do a lot of damage to my opponent if he decides to make a mistake. I can punish him for it. The specific example I'm trying to cover or get at here is a mistake he hasn't made yet, but he will. And basically, when you plant a piece in a position, you are setting yourself up for the ability to use that piece or utilize it for a later attack in game that sometimes, more often than not, that will be devastating, right? So I'm containing him currently, and I'm also planting myself there for the possibility for a great attack later on, right? Which actually comes to fruition. So this is why I use this example, is because it's so pivotal and powerful. So from this point, he doesn't want to risk losing his rook in a discovered attack. So now I'm going to only increase the power of that position by moving up and attacking on my terms, which allows me the initiative, because I've seized the initiative from my opponent. I've stayed his hand for just long enough. Now he's trying to focus on the D5 pawn, which is weak in this scenario because there's two attackers. I have one defender on that pawn, right? So that's a weak pawn in the scenario. With that being looked at, I'm going to go ahead and move over. But on a side note here that's very important that I've highlighted is basically lulling your opponent. My opponent has willingly moved both of his rooks on a dark diagonal. When you see that's happened, I've basically kind of moved him with pawn movements and microtransactions with my pawns to this point. Since he's willingly adopted this movement, when I have a dark squared bishop right there, that tells me I've lulled him into a sense of false security. There's going to be some movement here where he's going to attack. Since he just made a repetitive motion, that tells me my opponent does not have any ideas on how to proceed. So he is now lulled. He willingly, now that I've covered or recovered this weak pawn, has moved right back into the same position. This is lulling. This is a perfect example of lulling. He has willingly moved yet again into a very dangerous position. Now that I've seen that he's softened up enough and out of ideas to move into this position yet again, he's completely lulled. This is where the plant comes in. The reason why I moved my dark squared bishop up there, like I said before, is for the potential for a better attack later on in an advanced position. Since I'm in this advanced position now is the time, because my opponent is lulled, to move into a better position. So not only have I just made a exact or precise pawn strike, my opponent can't move past his own pieces, correct? Because he can't move through his own pieces, now I've basically sealed the deal. I'm going to go ahead and now move into a very advantageous attack position. With just that move alone, I've skewered both of my opponent's rooks in this scenario, right? He has to do something now to react. I'm walking away with a rook no matter what. And because of that, I'm now going to capitalize on that covered pawn advance that I had built on a little bit earlier, and I'm starting to move up now. And I'm only exacerbating the problem for my opponent. He's coming from a position of weakness, not strength, in this scenario. And then from here, he called the game. Some of the things that took place that I didn't quite cover just because there's so much is basically reading telegraphs. I kind of did it, but I didn't name it. So when my opponent was moving back and forth with his rook on the back rank because he was out of ideas trying to attack my weak points and I wasn't going for it, he was lulled. But at the same time, I was reading his telegraphs and I knew that my opponent had no idea on how to get out of that situation. So that gave me advantage. And because of that, because of reading his telegraphs, I could expect a certain kind of movement from him, which I was correct on. And because of that, I was able to nail him and basically end this game in victory. He resigned overall. So because of that, I came out on top. So this is basically going to be the end of the lesson. Like I said, I'm going to repost the video in its entirety without these small breakups in between. So just for you guys, if you guys like this video, learn anything from it, or enjoyed this content, please let me know. Leave a like, comment, or subscribe if you feel the need to do that. With all that stuff being said, I hopefully see you guys in the next video. Elias out.